Also today, in the countdown to next week's Jobs and Skills Summit, Australia is setting its sights on growing the number of high-end technology industry jobs to somewhere eventually around 1.2 million. And that'll partly involve picking a few tech sector winners and concentrating on them. We'll hear a little later from Industry and Science Minister Ed Husic on how and where those jobs will be targeted. First, though, we did just want to bring you some breaking news, and an emergency warning has been issued for a bushfire burning close to Palmerston in the Northern Territory, with people in that area advised to leave immediately. Emergency services say the out-of-control fire is burning in Tivendale near Kirkland Road and Wishart Road, with road closures in place as fire crews work to contain the blaze. Now, motorists have been urged or advised to slow down and drive to conditions, as fire crews may be working along the roadside and smoke may affect visibility. We'll have more on that situation around Palmerston there in urban Darwin a little later, and we'll bring it to you as it comes to hand. First, though, the top legal minds advising the Australian government have run the ruler over Scott Morrison's tendency to appoint himself as a multifaceted minister for many things. Anthony Albanese is this afternoon getting a briefing on the findings of the Solicitor General, having been advised that his review was finished while the Prime Minister was visiting a jewellery factory in his own electorate earlier today. Now, the investigation examines only whether any laws were broken, not whether Mr Morrison's creeping responsibilities were the right or the proper thing to do. Mr Albanese's perturbed by what his predecessor did, and he's giving every hint he may be interested in a broader inquiry to ensure future Prime Ministers remain on a tight constitutional leash.
There are real questions to be answered here. There is a question of legality. Now, there hasn't been a suggestion of illegality, but there have been questions raised about how this could occur, how it fits in with the conventions and the normal accountability mechanisms and checks and balances that are there in our parliamentary democracy. They are matters that need to be considered. I'll await and consider the advice properly. I will release it publicly. I'm giving that commitment so that everyone will have the opportunity to see the advice for themselves. But I would have thought that Australians are concerned that this could ever occur.
OK, so by around this time tomorrow, we should know a little more about what flows from here to prevent the accumulation of secret ministries under any one Prime Minister. Scott Morrison's former Deputy PM, Barnaby Joyce, is under no doubt that what was done was legal. But as to why it was kept so secret and why he didn't challenge the trend more forcefully, Barnaby Joyce is still adopting the position he took over the weekend. Best not to have rocked the boat because the Nationals might have lost a minister or some staffing resources.
Let's get the chronology right, OK? In April, Mr Morrison made this decision. I arrived back at my job on the 22nd of June. Decision had been made. And no one came and told me about the issue. So basically, through a process of deduction over a period of time, it became apparent that Mr Morrison had the capacity on the PEP 11 decision to override the minister, which he did. And he went to a press conference and he did it. It was apparent. Now, what people are saying is that by some sort of Nostradamus conception, I would understand that all these other ministries and other sort of imbroglio was going on. Of course not. And
why didn't you ask more questions about why he had those?
Why didn't everybody ask more questions? You know, because it's so easy to be wise after the event, isn't it? We're all geniuses after the event.
But you were the Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah, I was. And I'm just saying, I've given the explanation. Everyone can be a genius after. I would win every Melbourne Cup with if I had the knowledge that I have now about the races that have happened before me.
Now, out and about with the Prime Minister at the start of what's called Skills Week was Brendan O'Connor, who holds that portfolio. By now, a worker shortage is very well established as a known pinch point on the economy, and calls are coming louder than ever from some state governments to import more foreign workers on visas. Brendan O'Connor's explained that the government's getting on with those visas, but this must be balanced against training locals who are already here.
We're speaking with the skills ministers of all jurisdictions, state and territory, to make sure we get a compact so that we know how we can invest in our existing labour market and make sure we're delivering the skills that employers need. That's the first thing we need to do. Insofar as skilled migration is concerned, we know how important that is to employers. It's not a binary choice. We do understand how important it is, and that's why my ministerial colleagues, Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles, are working very hard, firstly, to unclog the visa application process so we can accelerate those visas in need in the areas of acute skill shortage needs. And of course, we're looking at other requirements too. So we are engaged in skilled migration pathways, but we are very clear it's also about investing in our own workforce.
Let's check in with the current Nationals leader on skills and other matters. David Littleproud is in Carnarvon, Western Australia today. Thanks for beaming in from such a long way away today. David Littleproud, why don't we start with some information around what's going to happen tomorrow. Anthony Albanese has flagged that he will have been briefed and received the Solicitor General's legal advice. He'll talk to Cabinet, and he seems open to some sort of examination about what went wrong in the Morrison Ministries matter. Would you support some form of inquiry?
Oh, look, I think we need to see the report first. I think it's appropriate that the government sees it, the Cabinet works through it. That's the Cabinet process that we felt should have been respected that Scott Morrison got wrong. So it'd be hypocritical for us to say anything else. But I think in the fullness of time we need to see that report, understand if there's recommendations. We'll be collaborative, both the Nationals and the Liberals, in making sure that we can put the framework around our democratic institutions to protect them, to build that trust and keep that trust for generations to come. So we'll be constructive around that. We'll work with the government to make sure we do that. We're not going on any witch hunt, and I think the government needs to now be constructive rather than this attempt to continue to tear down Scott Morrison. And it's so much so that they even forgot to acknowledge Vietnam Veterans Day last week. The Prime Minister was so hell-bent on tearing down the former coalition government, forgetting he was the Prime Minister in that exalted office, should bestow the respect and honour on our Vietnam veterans. In fact, forgot to do it at all. I think we need a level of maturity to this debate now, and that's what the coalition will bring to it. There's lessons to be learned, and we'll work through constructively through that matter. All
right, you seem open to that. Can I also ask on the flip side of that, do you have any misgivings, because I know some legal scholars do, about the Solicitor General's advice being made public? I think the argument goes that if ever any of these administrative matters set in place by Scott Morrison were to be challenged, it would be the Solicitor General who would be intimately involved in fending off those challenges. Do you have any misgivings about that?
Well, depending on what the advice is, and I think that's where the Prime Minister will make that determination and should be given the space to do that. I think he'll get that advice today, and if there are parts within that could have effects on cases before the courts, then obviously that will be portions that he may have to, through legal advice, withhold. But I know through the fullness of time the Prime Minister's given a commitment. I take him on face value on that. I think he is genuine to the extent that he wants to try and resolve this matter. If there's recommendations that we work together to resolve them, and we'll do that. We're just saying take the politics out of it now. We're trusting the government to make whatever they can transparent. If there are legal limitations, then we respect that until they're rectified. But I think as a parliament, I think there is bipartisan support to make sure that we put the safeguards around our democratic institutions to protect them well into the future and protect the trust that we expect our community to have in them.
Does your being open to those safeguards include the operations of Government House and the Governor-General?
Oh, well, I think there are those safeguards and checks and balances there at the moment, and obviously if there's further, then we'll work within the constraints of what our Constitution is and making sure that we can work within the mechanisms that are available to us. And I think the Governor-General has done that. I think that'll be demonstrated. I have no misgivings about what the Governor-General did during this, and I think that office should be respected. I think the Governor-General respected that office in the dealings. He was put in a predicament he shouldn't have been, and I think he would have taken the advice around him about how to handle that. And I think obviously the predicament he was put in is an unjustified one that he should never have been placed in, and the office of Governor-General should be respected. And I'm sure and I'm confident that the Governor-General respected that office.
I'm sure you were able to keep abreast of some of Barnaby Joyce's media appearances over the weekend and again today. Can I just ask, as a leader now, do you imagine a situation, David Littleproud, where you might fail to challenge a questionable or poor piece of judgment by Peter Dutton in order to hold staffing or other resources that the Nats are entitled to? You'd zip your lips?
Well, obviously we all do, and I know that Barnaby does and did when he was the leader. I think what we're talking about here was a very narrow part of the resource portfolio around an individual decision that had no effect on the National Party whatsoever. It was not within our seats. It was really not about taking over the entire portfolio. It was about one particular issue. And I think that Barnaby worked within what was provided to him and the information that was provided to him in a sensible and pragmatic way. This wasn't an issue that was upsetting to the entire coalition party room and particularly the National Party. The National Party really only heard peripheral views on this, and that it was an issue at all because it wasn't in any of our seats, and it was only a minister that, quite rightly, those discussions between the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister himself. And I think obviously the then Deputy Prime Minister made those determinations based on the narrow scope on which he was asked to make those determinations.
All right, but you can argue mathematically, can't you, that every position Scott Morrison annexed that belonged to a Nat, and there was one for the record, is a net loss for the Nationals?
Well, again, I'd have to see the circumstances in which I'm presented with having to make that representation and about where the National Party's position and whether more broadly the National Party and our members were impacted by it. And so, therefore, it's very hypothetical, and it's one that's very difficult to answer because those circumstances obviously would be different in the future. But I have a very open and transparent relationship and have intrinsic trust in Peter Dutton and the way that he deals with me. We've been very transparent in getting to an agreement moving forward in opposition, and I have great confidence that transparency will continue.
Yeah, I guess there are fewer pressure points in opposition than there might be in government. That's the nature of the beast. Why don't I take you over to skills, though, David Littleproud? You will be a participant in the Albanese government's Jobs and Skills Summit, and you've already stated publicly that you're going to take a particular position there when it comes to visas for agriculture workers. Hasn't that debate been run and won in this election, though? That is, they have a mandate, the Albanese government, to do exactly what they propose to do.
No, I don't believe they have. I think the evidence today shows that there's 172,000 jobs, not only in direct agriculture, but processing your food and fibre that needs to be filled. The Pacific scheme is which all they're prepared to provide to Australian agriculture fits about 50,000. So every Australian's going to feel this every time they go to the checkout because farmers are making investment decisions now not to plant, which means supply goes down, prices go up. So every time you go to the checkout, you should see Anthony Albanese's face on your docket because you're paying more because farmers are making investment decisions not to invest. We believe there's some practical measures, not just in bringing back the ag visa, because it wasn't just unskilled workers, it's in the processing sector. We need skilled workers in there, and we want a pathway to permanent residency. We want these people to stay in regional Australia, not just transit through. We want them to grow regional Australia, but we also think there's a real opportunity for pensioners and veterans to do more without affecting their payments. We think that's a pragmatic way that can be done quite easily and quickly, but we do believe investment investing in skills. And that's why we think extending the program that we started about paying the HECS of graduates in medicine or in nursing should continue and take it into new professions like pharmacies or engineers, even out in the regions. It's unique and it's acute out here, the shortages. And you've got to understand that even here in Western Australia, it's even more acute because of the vast distances between towns. And unfortunately, this government didn't invite anyone from regional Australia, and Western Australia's even got less a voice, and that's why the Nationals are over here listening to regional Western Australians. We want to go back, and we're going to use that platform. We're going to be pragmatic with this government, but we ask them to stop listening solely to unions and start listening to farmers. Come to Carnarvon and do what I've done. Sit in a shed and listen to farmers tell me about their challenges, but also the professional industries here that have a unique and very acute problem that can't be solved with a macro policy solution. And that's all I'll be taking. I want to be pragmatic. I want to work with the government. I've had my hand out from the start, but I'll hold them account if they don't come with any real solutions.
All right, well, you can bring that back to Canberra for the Jobs Summit, and we'll see what sort of hearing you get. David Littleproud, we'll see you, if not before, then back in Canberra for that. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, mate.
Now, we will have to wait to see what the Albanese government has in mind for some sort of inquiry or lessons learnt exercise arising from the Morrison Ministries saga, but there's no shortage of ideas or simply even questions. Some surround Scott Morrison's 2-year spell as Finance Minister, overlapping with the demise of Christine Holgate as Australia Post's Chief Executive in what became known as the Cartier Watches affair. Here's Christine Holgate on ABC Radio this morning, raising her own questions about the treatment she received during an investigation by the Department of Finance.
There was supposed to be an independent review into my situation, which was, led by the Finance Department. We now find out that Mr. Morrison was the Minister of the Finance Department under that review. So it doesn't sound very independent to me, and I think it's very concerning. I mean, look, the review said I'd done no wrong, but I think many people knew I'd done no wrong. But it's a very unusual situation, and I think it will make many of us question the decision the Prime Minister were taken under the Prime Minister when he was acting in all these positions.
Well, for her view on the matter, Greens Senator Sarah Hanson-Young and Sarah Hanson-Young joined us from Adelaide a short time ago. Sarah Hanson-Young, great to have you back on the program. Now, we're still discussing for a second week running, aren't we, the Morrison Ministries, and you're suggesting that there's quite a mess here potentially because of the fact that Scott Morrison was Finance Minister around the time that Christine Holgate and Australia Post were in his sights. Why is this a problem?
Well, if we just turn our minds back, Greg, to when all of this unfolded, the Prime Minister stood up in the chamber in question time and demanded that Christine Holgate go. The board of Australia Post flung into kind of urgent emergency meetings. They met several times over the space of 4 to 6 hours following that. And then there was a dispute as to whether Christine Holgate had in fact stepped aside or was told or was pushed. And of course, we now know as a result of all of this, the Australian taxpayer has had to actually fund money to release Christine Holgate from that position. We've had a whole Senate inquiry into this affair. We had a Finance Department inquiry into it at the request of the government of the day, the Morrison government, and all during this time, not one person, not the Prime Minister, not the Finance Minister, not the Australia Post Board, and not the Finance Department or the Communications Department ever told the Parliament or indeed Christine Holgate or the Australian people that the Prime Minister himself was one of the shareholder ministers. Yeah. It creates a whole level of murkiness to this. There's a very serious question about the political interference of the Prime Minister and his government in relation to the Australia Post Board at the time.
Yeah.
And now we find out that he actually was holding one of the ministries that is meant to be a step removed from the whole process.
Yeah, so of the finance ministry aspect in that chronology that you just gave us there, Sarah Hanson-Young, why does that trouble you most? Yes, that department was running its own investigation, but are you suggesting that Scott Morrison, for all we know, may have been pulling strings around that?
Well, we just don't know, Greg. There is a serious question about due process. That's what the Senate inquiry found. The majority report found that there was serious questions about whether the due process had been followed, whether Christine Holgate had been given an appropriate opportunity to respond. There was question marks over the behaviour of the Prime Minister just in the public reaction that he gave. But now we find out that he actually was in an extra position of power, and that was never disclosed at any moment or any point. So it really does create an uncertainty over the lack of due process and, in fact, the legality of whether Christine was removed.
Yeah, well, it is an offence to mislead the parliament. At least it's an offence as a parliamentarian to do so. And I think by extension, you're not supposed to mislead committee inquiries either. Now, your committee, Environment and Communications, wants to reconvene, does it? Or at least you're asking it to. What questions would you like it to answer if, in fact, it reconsiders some of these questions?
Well, we, as the committee, the Senate committee that hosted this inquiry over many months, had the Finance Department in front of us a number of times. We had the Australia Post Board, and we had a whole raft of correspondence from the two shareholder ministers and their officers in relation to it. Not once was it disclosed that the Prime Minister himself, the person of which political interference was being queried, was in a position of being a shareholder minister. So it's now up to that committee to reconvene. I'm asking my colleagues to do that, to reconvene, to consider the evidence in front of us, to see whether we've actually been misled. It's a very serious issue of parliamentary privilege for a department or a minister, or in fact any witness, to not tell the truth. And I think there's some serious questions about whether information was withheld.
And then there is a question, would you acknowledge, Sarah Hanson-Young, that the department itself and some of its most senior officials simply may not have known either?
And doesn't that create, doesn't that show just how untenable this situation was, how ridiculous of a situation the former Prime Minister put the Australian public service in, his own ministers, and then indeed the public and the Parliament. And it is just unthinkable that a Prime Minister thinks he can keep it to himself, his level of power and influence and the levers that he could pull at any time, and no one else knew. It's crazy. I mean, it is the type of stuff that you hear of in countries that have dictatorships. It's not the type of situation you have in Australia, of which we are a proud democracy.
Well, that invites me to ask, Sarah, beyond the intricacies of the Christine Holgate matter and your particular committee, we get the general impression that the Albanese government may be supportive of some lessons learnt review here so that it doesn't happen again. Exactly how far-reaching do you think such a process should be? Should it, for instance, not only look at Scott Morrison, but for argument's sake also at the conduct of Government House?
Look, I think any inquiry needs to look at not just the behaviour and activities of the former Prime Minister, but also those who did know, and that of course includes the Governor-General and assumably some members of the public service who helped to facilitate this. And it is just not good enough for anyone to say, oh, well, it was just up to him. We have a checks and balances process of democracy in this country. And here, clearly, the checks and balances were not done.
And, I mean, would it be controversial? It would certainly be highly unusual for the Parliament to be examining anyway the operations of the Government House, or more particularly the Governor-General himself. Do you know of many precedents there?
Look, very highly unusual, but we're discussing an issue that is extraordinarily unusual. In fact, should not have happened. Just should not have happened, should not have occurred. And if there was any arguments about the Prime Minister taking on extra ministerial roles at some point because of the pandemic, why wasn't it at least made public? Why all the secrecy? And then why the power creep of Scott Morrison as the years stretched on? And this is a bloke who never wanted to take responsibility for anything when he was confronted with problems, but seemingly behind the scenes, in secret, took the power for himself.
Well, Sarah Hanson-Young, we know there's going to be further developments tomorrow from the government's point of view. That's the Albanese government. Let's see where all of this takes us, and your committee processes too. Thanks for joining us once again today.
Thank you very much.
The Prime Minister is promising to publicly release the findings of a review that his government ordered into the leasing of the Darwin port to a Chinese-owned company. That's despite the Department of Defence refusing a Freedom of Information request for access to a national security review ordered by the former Morrison coalition government. Our reporter Jono Gibson has the story. Jono joins us now live from our Darwin newsroom. Maybe first principles, Jono, first of all, and welcome. Tell us about the review that you were trying to get from Defence, or at least initially.
Yeah, good afternoon, Greg. Well, you'll recall back in about May last year, there was some escalating tensions going on with China. There was an election looming on the horizon for the coalition government. And the then Defence Minister, Peter Dutton, confirmed that the National Security Committee of Cabinet had tasked his department with reviewing the lease of the Darwin port, which of course back in 2015 the Northern Territory government agreed to hand over the lease for 99 years to this Chinese-owned company, Landbridge, at a cost of about $506 million. And many months passed without really knowing what was the outcome of that review. But in late December, just before the new year, the Australian newspaper, I think it was, reported that the Defence Review had found no adverse security findings sufficient to revoke the lease as it stood at that time. And despite this, we've never seen this particular review. The government has never publicly released it. So when the new Labor government came to power back in May, I submitted a Freedom of Information request seeking the findings of the review and also some of the correspondence around it. And we've had a decision on that Freedom of Information request, and what was decided was it revealed that there were 10 documents. In fact, there were 13 documents included in the scope, but 10 of them were found to be Cabinet in confidence documents that were created for Cabinet. And among those 10, they included 2 separate risk assessments that were done last year, and also a presentation that was prepared in February this year. And the decision maker said that they had gone to the Prime Minister and Cabinet Department, and they had also supported the decision not to release those specific 10 documents for Cabinet reasons.
Right, so even though you've been thwarted in large measure, there was that public reporting, as you said, by the Australian that piqued interest, and I know it led to some questions being asked of the then Prime Minister. So I think Defence did agree to release some points that ministers would be recommended to speak about at liberty. What did they say?
Well, that's right. So there were 3 separate documents that were released, which were not cabinet-related documents, and they were largely whole-of-government talking points. And what they're about, as you would know, is giving government members and ministers an idea of what to say if they're asked specific questions from journalists. So there were a range of anticipated questions that were prepared for government ministers, and they included things like, will the government act on defence advice that the Landbridge lease is not a security threat and conclude the review? And is the lease of the Port of Darwin a national security risk? Some others went on to say, will the government publicly announce the review's outcomes, who's leading the review, and also will the AUKUS security partnership have any impact on Landbridge's lease of the Darwin port? And the responses were pretty innocuous. They weren't giving much away. Essentially, the suggested responses were, yes, we have a review underway. It is still ongoing, but due to the national security implications, we can't comment any further.
Yeah, nice of them to second-guess the questions. It was the answers we would have been most interested in. But why don't we wind forward, because come May, along comes the Albanese government conducting its own review into the port deal. But what do we know of its status, Jono?
Well, all we know is that it's continuing. We know that Anthony Albanese dropped into Darwin shortly after his election victory, and he was asked at a press conference what he was going to do about the Darwin port now that he was in power, given he has long been critical of the decision to lease the port and also critical of the federal government's oversight of that decision. And today he was asked again what's going on with that particular review and whether or not he would release it publicly. So here's a little of what he had to say.
I have said that we will be reviewing the Darwin port ownership of lease. People would be aware that it was leased out to a company connected very directly with the government of the People's Republic of China. At the time that happened, we opposed it. I was the infrastructure minister, shadow minister at the time, and we were concerned about that, and we expressed our opposition. I've asked for advice, and when we receive it, we of course will make it public.
So, Greg, as you can see there, the Prime Minister not only outlining some of his concerns, but also confirming that once that review is completed, he says it will be made public. And then the next question will be, well, what is the government going to do about it?
Yep, might save you a bit of time and work on FOI.
Lines are operating at full capacity, and our engineers are 5 times more likely to receive early childhood education than the poor ordinary.
There is a digital divide, and we hope that this will allow people who previously had no way of accessing material to access it.
We frequently travel on those roads. The damage done.
True fight of our lives. The United Nations Secretary General has called for a ceasefire in countries locked down in the conflict.
Of the surface of the Earth. Less than 3% is freshwater, and most of that is frozen in glaciers and polar ice caps. This leaves less than 0.01% readily accessible for all the planet's freshwater needs. But the supply of this vital resource is under threat from pollution, mismanagement, rising demand, and climate change. In just over a decade, it's estimated that the world will only have 60% of the water it needs. Unless we work harder to conserve it.
I'm Russell Beard and I've come to Ladakh in northern India, where some engineers have come up with some innovative solutions to alleviate water stress in mountain communities.
And I'm Imani Zain in Jordan, where women are taking the water crisis into their own hands.
Millions of people rely directly on glacial meltwater for survival, but due to climate change, these reservoirs in the sky are disappearing at an alarming rate. Some scientists have predicted that by the end of the century, much of the Himalayas could be practically ice-free. Here in Ladakh, which experiences only 50 millimeters of annual rainfall, glaciers have been the life source for centuries. But due to climate change, over 14% of the local glaciated area has been lost in the last 50 years. I'm here to visit an engineer who's come up with a beautiful and extraordinary way of preserving the glacial water using monuments made of ice. In the town of Leh, I meet Sewang Dolme, a local environmental scientist. I understand that you are a bit of an expert about climate change and the effects on mountain communities. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a sense of some of the challenges that they're facing here in Leh?
The main crisis is that you have a Khardung Glacier.
Is that what we can see right there?
Yeah, that's Khardung Glacier. And that's where 80% of the water is coming for the Leh residents. And that glacier is receding at a very fast rate. And every family in Leh has a guest house, and they drain groundwater like anything. If there is no glacial water to recharge the groundwater, then of course there will be water crisis. You will see people, fighting over water.
Literally?
Yeah, literally. The situation is getting worse by the day.
Almost 1 billion people are affected by shrinking glaciers throughout the Himalayas. In nearby village Phyang, farmers are on the front line. Sonam Dolma and Phunchuk Anchuk have been working here for more than 40 years. Thank you. Oh, Sonam, thank you so much. Thank you, Julie. Okay, so cheers. Have you noticed any changes, perhaps with the seasons or with the levels of water?
Tekaltes kamata tukshikchat inna chatpa yon kamata luzna kamri metkana chachok charchesan chachok tukshikchana naksengati riul I pyansokskunla kaspo chacheno chupie marchantes kala chachok chezna kamri metpa yang chikmane mana kongni chas kaspo chacheno ati chupie chante kaspo chacheno.
Here in the region of Ladakh, the population relies heavily on the Indus River. But with the situation getting dramatically worse, a local engineer, Sonnam Wanchuk, has stepped up to the challenge of helping the villagers adapt to these changes.
In January, February, nobody needs water, so the streams flow and go into the Indus and into the ocean. Whereas in April, May, everybody, all plants, all humans are all dying for water. Yeah? And then there's acute shortage of water. What Ice Stupa does is, by using winter water, storing it in the form of ice, and it melts exactly when there's this acute shortage. That spring problem is solved using winter water into ice that melts in spring, and then you're set.
At the Environmental Mountain School he founded in 1988, Sonnam has been refining and teaching his Ice Stupa concept for the last 2 years.
The pipe brings water and then it falls down and becomes a stupa, right? You know, next 40, 50 years, the people who will be running this world are now in schools and colleges. I want to engage them in these innovative ways to be sensitive towards the environment in the mountains, so that then the earth could be in safe hands. And before we go to the ice stupa, we'll see a little demonstration of how it is formed. Huh? Now that, suppose, is the mountain, and that bucket there is, say, the stream. From the lake or the stream, water comes in the pipe, which is underground, but here you can see, and there is pressure in the pipe. And then it comes like this. So you can see small droplets, which means water is exposed to the -20, -30 air, loses its heat and freezes. There is no moving part, there is no electricity, just gravity. That's the beauty of it. Good. Thank you.
We're heading up to the ice stupas further up in the mountains, but first we have to make a quick stop.
Oh God, okay, what have we got into here? They use these for the ice stupas to help the ice form. So this is a kind of vital part. It's like the skeleton of the stupa, if you like. I'll go and give them a hand, right?
One, two,
Okay. It's my contribution. There it is. Wow. Never seen anything like that before. This is... Now I understand. You know? It's quite it's a bonkers idea. It's quite crazy, really.
The design of the stupa is critical for its success. It must have a minimal surface area to provide a maximum protection from the sun. This enables it to last long into spring, sometimes up to 4 months. If the same volume of ice was a flat glacier, it would melt within days.
1, 2. This dude's climbed the top with his crampons and ice axe, and he's thrown down this rope, and he's just pulling them up piece by piece and just adding them to the pile.
The prickly buckthorn is added all the way to the top of the stupa. The water catches onto the thorns, making it easier to crystallize in the cold weather.
And when you see the size of it, you really understand how that could have a significant impact for irrigation. What do you reckon the volume of water is there?
2 million liters.
2 million?
2 million liters, yes.
At the bottom of that tunnel, really in the heart of the ice stupa, is this large pipe. And that's the one that's channeling the meltwater down from the glacier up on the mountain. It's coming down to the base of that pipe, and because of that head of pressure, it's forcing it 15 or 20 meters up into the air and out into a sprinkler to coat the outer structure. It's quite spooky in there.
Sonam's vision isn't just about a handful of ice stupas in one mountain village, but hundreds of them, protecting the entire Himalayas and helping irrigate fields and forests. 5,000 trees were planted in 2015 and are irrigated each spring with the water harvested from the ice stupas. He's already won global recognition for this project.
What's the future for these guys? Where do you see these going in the next few years?
I see it going in 2 different directions. Lower and lower towards the people in the villages, higher and higher towards the highest parts of the valley, where you can grow many of them, chains of them. So our hope is we could reglaciate what we have lost to buy time and adapt to changing climate.
So we've just lost the sun over the hill there. It's getting cold very quickly, but we've got a plan.
We've got Stanton and Thomas here, and they've brought some prayer flags to tie up onto the top of these two ice stupas, and we'll get a sense tomorrow morning how effective they are at creating these amazing structures.
The water in the pipe is released overnight when temperatures reach -20 or -30 degrees.
Oh, here it comes! Ah!
Slowly building up these structures until they reach heights of 60 or 70 feet.
Yeah! It's like oil rig.
Yeah.
It's like you've struck oil, but you've struck water, eh?
The next morning, I returned to the stupas to see the changes that have happened overnight.
Oh, wow. Oh, man, look at that. That is fantastic, isn't it? Let's go and see. I want to climb up it, but I don't know if that's a good idea. Let's see. If I get stuck, I'm going to make quite a nice addition to this sculpture. I'm just thinking they're going to come back tomorrow and find me in here. Bearing in mind, the whole reason that they're doing this is to try and conserve that winter meltwater. It's like a kind of water battery. They charge it up in the winter, and then it melts in the spring.
We are losing our glaciers almost for no fault of ours. Life would not have been possible at all in this desert had it not been for those glaciers. Because it had this fossilized water from tens of thousands of years ago, we are able to survive. And if they are gone, we'll be gone. And it'll be a real desert with no life. People in big cities, if they lived simply, then people in the mountains would simply live. Yeah? And sooner or later, it will come to their own doorsteps. So we should be sensitive to see the first signs and mend our ways.
Around the world, sources of fresh water are dwindling and drought is spreading. The investment bank Goldman Sachs has called water the petroleum of the next century. Yet, it's already fueling tension. On the Indus River system, new dams built by India are seen by rival Pakistan as a threat to national security. Within India, anger boiled over in Bengaluru in 2016 when the Supreme Court ordered the state of Karnataka to release water from the River Calvary into Tamil Nadu. And water's become a weapon of war in Iraq and Syria. By 2025, 2/3 of the world's population could be living with water shortage. Conflict over water may be closer than you think.
Jordan is one of the driest countries in the world, with less water per capita than almost anywhere else on Earth. Climate change, population growth, and politics have put an already strained water supply under further stress.
With the country recently suffering from its worst drought in 900 years, it is now estimated to only have enough water reserves to support 2 million people, yet it has a population of over 6 million. With faulty pipes and plumbing contributing to the crisis, I'm here to visit a scheme which is putting women at the heart of efforts to combat this growing issue. Water is severely rationed in Jordan. I meet water expert Dr. Raed El-Tabini at one of the wells in Mafraq, where people come to buy more water.
So, Dr. Raed, this is where people come when they run out of water?
Yes. This is the main well here, the groundwater.
So these guys, are they going to sell the water to people, or is this for them? Are they buying it now?
Yeah,
Can
but
I ask
some...
them?
Yeah.
Okay. السلام عليكم.
يعطيك العافية شيخ، كيف حالك؟ شلونك؟
هذا الماء لكم ولا بتبيعوه؟ نعم. كم مرة تجون تعبوا ماء؟
والله أحيانا بالصيف وصل فوق 15.
This means that there's 15 families asked him to bring water for them, 15 families a day.
Wow.
What we get for a day is 60 to 80 liters, which is equal to a shower time on average somewhere else in the world.
This is well below the threshold defining water stress, and it's due to drop further in the coming years.
So this is normal. People run out of water and they need to come
in Jordan, we live with the run out of water every day.
Why is the situation so bad?
With the Israeli, with the Syrians, there is issues when it comes to water share. We cannot live without water. I think personally, the coming war in the region will be about water.
According to one study, the kingdom's supply of fresh water was on track to be exhausted as early as 2060. To make matters worse, around 50% of the water distributed to houses across the country is lost through illegal tapping and faulty pipes. But a practical solution to these water issues has been developed in collaboration with the Jordanian government. It's known as the Water-Wise Women's Initiative. This course teaches women water-saving techniques and plumbing skills and is supervised by ex-graduates.
The ladies are being taught what happens if there's a faulty tap. All the parts of the tap need to come out in order, so then they can go back in order so the plumber can check them one by one.
Astonishingly, the total loss to leakage annually is at least 76 billion litres, enough to satisfy the needs of 2.6 million people.
I am reattaching the inlet into the tap, and I've got to make sure it's very secure. Okay, so that's tight enough. Okay, good. Hello. Good, well done. Thank you very much. No, good. Hello. So what made you want to go on a course?
أنا يعني ما عندي إخوان وكنا بنات بالبيت فهذا الإشي بيساعدني وأكيد بيساعد إخواتي يعني.
Women are specifically being trained because in traditional Middle Eastern culture, the husband must be present before a male plumber can visit. Being able to fix the problem themselves saves them both time and vital water. With 3,000 women around the country learning from this scheme, this initiative is making a big difference. Some of the qualified water-wise women have got a job fixing the plumbing at a local mosque, and I've been invited to join them.
A little piece of metal is broken into the tank and it's contaminated the water. So they've got to make sure that every drop of contaminated water is out of the tank before they refill it with fresh water. How long have you been a plumber?
Since October 2015. I love it because it's really, really helpful and you can save something really expensive to us. It's the water.
Yeah.
Oh. Welcome back.
Yeah. The imam of the mosque is just checking that everything's done. Bad, huh? But I don't think he'd know. These ladies know.
With the water tank on the roof signed off, it's time to head inside to complete the job.
So we're basically in the ablution room where people come and perform, they wash before they pray. And the ladies are going to show me how to attach these to the tap and they don't waste as much water. This helps conserve water.
Because it's small, it's hard to...
Yeah.
You have to focus.
Oh, God, I've lost my screen. Failed at the first hurdle. That's very embarrassing. When you go to people's houses and sometimes do you find maybe some men who kind of don't like that there's a female plumber who's come to their home? What do you say? They say...
Just try us and see if we can do it or not. Just give us a chance. When they see we are really self-confident with this, they look at us like, oh my God, maybe she can do it.
Yeah.
So,
okay, let's see. Wow, yeah, it works. No. Oh, no, you see, I haven't done it very well. It's leaking from the top. So, yeah, that is not... Okay. So, okay, I think I need to stop now and let the professionals take over.
The work the water-wise women are doing is even more important now, considering the impact the war in neighbouring Syria is having on Jordan. Around 2 million refugees are being hosted in the country, increasing the rate of groundwater depletion. Just 15 miles from Mafraq is Za'atari refugee camp.
It's huge. It's like a little city. And there's 80,000 Syrian refugees living here, which is putting an incredible strain on Jordan's water supply.
Getting water to the people living here is a massive logistical operation and carefully controlled. With no pipe network, 58 trucks like this one distribute water daily to 12,000 tanks in the camp.
Almost getting full.
But when the water runs out, that's it.
From technical point of view, we have a bank account here that is not being recharged effectively. So it's like we are withdrawing every day, but then we are depositing very little.
Ensuring the Syrians manage their water rations is vital. Ashraq Mashaqbeh is one of the camp's water promoters, educating the refugees on how best to conserve their water.
The water here for Jordan, it's the quantity it's so small, so they need like an awareness session for them to improve their usage for the water.
These awareness sessions to help refugees cope with limited supplies are held here daily.
احنا وجودنا اليوم ودعيناكم واهلا وسهلا فيكم. حابين نعمل جلسه عن موضوع ترشيد استهلاك المي في المخيم، انه في كميه معينه لكل فرد، في توزيع، في محددات للتوزيع، في كميه لكل فرد هي 35.
It's just women here, Ashraq. So why is that?
Because they are the let's say the core for the family. They are responsible for everything.
Learning the best way to manage their water ration is vital for these women.
هل المية اللي توفرن بالخزان الأسبوع اللي فات أشطف بيه.
It's great. It's really good, the work that they're doing here. They're really trying to kind of reinforce this message of how important water is and how much we need to conserve it.
One refugee has been on the WaterWise Women's course. I meet up with Safa Sukriya, who is now one of the initiative's most successful women. She's set up her own business and employs 5 other female plumbers.
إنه أنا أجيت من الشام، عنا مي نحن كتير هنيك. أنا أول ما أجيت إنه صرت دق على الجيران، وين المي؟ خلصت المي. قالوا لي إيه ما أنتِ خلصتيها خلص ما في مي، استني للأسبوع الجاي. أوكي. هلا أنا شرطي لأولادي يعني بس يجوا يفتحوا المي، لا ماما نوصوا لا كذا، فأنا شرطة المياه في البيت.
For Safa, water education is essential.
احنا دولة فقيرة فالمفروض انه يعني يكون في وعي كافي. لازم يكون في حلقات تواصل بيننا وبينهم، انه نعمل لهم حلقات توعية، مبادرات، احنا عم نحاول يعني عم نعمل جهدنا.
It's clear that water shortages across the globe are driving people to find creative and sustainable solutions. New designs, such as this mesh-like structure in Ethiopia, are converting air droplets to drinking water. Other devices are looking to the power of the sun to help solve water issues in countries like Ecuador and Ghana. Until the underlying causes are addressed, water scarcity will continue to spread. Yet innovations like these provide hope that we can adapt in the meantime.
Across the globe, breathtaking efforts to clean up the planet's air are underway.
In Milan, companies are turning to a radical solution, a biodynamic cement that eats toxic pollutants. So this really is a living building that's constantly interacting with its environment.
Earthrise visits the frontiers of the battle for the environment.
Scientists here in Iceland are pioneering a new technique to reduce emissions. Earthrise looks at new ways of preventing air pollution on Al Jazeera.
Here's your weather update in a minute 15. What do you say we begin in the Middle East, where last time we spoke, not a whole lot of change. Still plenty of hot sunshine, some rain to go for western areas of Yemen, and still dusty conditions to be found from Salalah right through to Muscat in the forecast on Monday. Got to take you to Pakistan because it has been very active as of late and still dealing with some rain left for Sindh province. Here comes our next monsoon depression. This is a third one in about as many weeks. Now we are on Tuesday as we see it pour into the country. Upper Sindh province, eastern Baluchistan and South Punjab provinces will really